doctors, being afraid to be replaced by an app for diagnosis, or being told how to perform work for citizens. So these changes are creating a lot of anxiety in the world of work, lots of fears, a lot of being afraid of seeing their work being more precarious, seeing their job being dequalified, or being forced to be requalified. We wish the world of work and the world was as simple as it used to be, or as the way we used to conceptualize it, as employees for working for pay on one side and workers and self-employed working for profits on the other side, and having a clear line in between the two. But unfortunately, that line between those two former classes of work of employees no longer exists. We've seen the development of new forms of employment that forced changes in the way we measured them and introduced and transformed international standards that measuring those changes in the world of work. What we're going to do this afternoon is we're going to focus on one of the elements that was introduced this morning. We've talked about new standards of measuring work and transformations of work, work class. We talked about dimensions of work to be measured. We're going to focus on one specific one, which is the work relationship, and more specifically on the implementations of the international classifications of status of employment. We have 5 great presentations for you. They've been given the same instructions and this morning, so they have 12 minutes sharp. Otherwise, we won't have time to have questions after the session. So please do respect the 12 minutes to give us a chance to have more debate. So we will start first with Antonio Rinaldo Di Scienza, who has joined the Statistical Standard and Method Unit of the Department of Statistics at the ILO for the first time in 2017. But since December 2023, he works as the Senior Labor Statistician on the development of guidance and on the provisions of training and support to countries for the implementations of the latest statistics standards and good practices for measurements of labors and other forms of work in household surveys. Antonio, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. Okay, this presentation is about the new international classification of status in employment, the X18. We will start talking about the reasons why there was a need to revise the X93. Then we see the new statistical classification X18. We will talk about dependent contractors, and in the end, we will look at the measurement approach proposed for the labor force survey. Now, why there was a need to revise the X93? Because there was a need to provide a more detailed and meaningful classification that better reflects the changes in employment arrangements that are taking place in many countries, such as, for example, the increasing prevalence of non-standard forms of employment, increasing variety of contractual arrangements that sometimes with ambiguous work relationship, and increasing uncertainty about the boundary between different categories of workers, particularly between the self-employment and the paid employment. As already been said, that globalization and digitalization drive and facilitate new ways of organizing production and employment. And new and more flexible type of work relationships are likely to grow in importance. These issues are major concerns for policymakers, though there is the need to make non-traditional employment more visible and need to produce statistical information to adequately monitor these changes. The International Classification X18 was introduced by Resolution 1 adopted by the 20 ICLS in 2018. This replaced the X93 and is fully aligned with the 19th ICLS resolution. This resolution provides the reference concepts, the definitions, the classification itself, but also the classification called XO18 that is an extension to the other forms of work that are unpaid. The resolution provides also the set of cross-cutting variables that support the analysis of the work categories. provides also guidelines on data measurement and guidelines on the indicators that have to be produced and disseminated. The classification provides 10 mutually exclusive categories of status in employment. If we see the differences with the ICSE 93, we notice that now we have 2 detailed categories of employers, 2 detailed categories of own account workers. We have a new category of dependent contractors. We have 4 detailed categories of employees. We still have the category of contributing family workers, but we also notice that members of producers' cooperatives do not longer constitute its own status in employment. Now, these 10 detailed categories can be rearranged or organized according to two different hierarchies. The first one is called ICSE 18A and is based on the type of authority that the worker is able to exercise in relation to the work performed, and creates a dichotomy between independent workers and dependent workers. And this is suitable for various types of analysis of the labor market. The second hierarchy is called ICSE 18R, is based on the type of economic risk to which the worker is exposed, and creates the dichotomy between workers in employment for profit and workers in employment for pay. And this is suitable to provide data to national accounts and for the identification of wage employment. Dependent contractors is the category that is a new category that is the most important change of the ICSE and also the most challenging, because this is an in-between situation that is on the boundary between own account workers that work in house of market enterprise and employees. Now, these dependent contractors have a high degree of economic risk that is typical of own account workers, but also have a reduced authority over their activities that is typical of employees. The identification of dependent contractor was a challenge, and is still a challenge for many statistical agencies in both the developed and developing world. These have existed historically, even though they have been included, as someone said this morning, but not identified in statistics. They were frequently classified as own account workers or as employee, but there were not clear treatment of this group. If we look at the statistical definition, we see that these are workers who have contractual arrangements of a commercial nature to provide goods or services for or through another economic unit. They are not employees of the unit, but workers in employment for profit, do not employ themselves one or more person as an employee, do not have incorporated enterprises, and are paid by commercial transactions. Now, all these characteristics are characteristics typical of independent workers. However, dependent contractors are also operationally and economically dependent on another entity that exercises control over their activities and directly benefits from the work performed by them. These are characteristics that they share with the dependent workers. And here you see the in-between situation. What is the general approach for measurement? We start from the self-declared status in employment, as we did for the ICSE 93. But then we need to use additional questions to confirm or correct the ICSE 18 categories. And this is necessary to reflect the complexity of the reality that the standards are trying to capture. Now, dependent contractors, this new category, is identified through 2 different tracks. One for self-declared employees, and another for self-declared self-employed. Let's see how we identify the different categories. Let's start with the employees. Now, for employees, we need to verify the existence of an agreement of employment, the so-called employer-employee relationship. Therefore, we need question on self-declared status, payment type, employer contribution to social insurance, access to annual leave, paid annual leave, and paid sick leave, and also other type of details on the contract to distinguish the 4 detailed categories. For those self-declared employees that lack the conditions normally available to an employee, and these conditions are the wage or salary, the payment with a wage or salary, and the coverage by social protection. Now, if this condition lack for these people are reclassified as dependent contractors. And this was the first track. And now there is another track to identify or to distinguish dependent contractors from independent workers. To identify employers and independent workers, we need to verify that those who declare themselves, report themselves as business operators need to be truly independent. And the question required are the self-declared status, hiring of employees, incorporation, dependency on another company or person, whether a main client or an intermediary or a single supplier. And also we need to assess the control, if a control is exercised by the other entity over price, over working time, over the way the work has to be carried out. Now, self-declared business operators that do not hire employees and do not have incorporated enterprise are reclassified as dependent contractors if they are dependent on another entity that also exercise control over their activities. There is a third interesting group that also have a lot of reclassification, contributing family workers. Now, we know that they do not receive regular payments, such as a work wage or salary, in return for the work performed. However, if the respondents say that they do receive a wage or salary, they are reclassified as employee. Also, contributing family workers do not make the most important decisions affecting the enterprise and do not have responsibility for it. Now, if they take decision on how to run the business, they are reclassified as independent workers or even as dependent contractors if they are not truly independent, as we said before. And the question required in this case are self-declared status in employment, type of payment, decision-making in the business, and in case they do take decision on the business, we need to ask all the questions to identify, to distinguish between independent workers and dependent contractors. This figure shows a result from a pilot study and show the difference between self-declared status in employment and ICSE 18, the recoded status in employment, ICSE 18. Now, let's see the upper bar. The upper bar is people that are self-declared employees. The colors in that bar indicates the ICSE 18 category. The blue color says that 58.7% of those who consider themselves as employee remain classified as employee. But actually 41% of those people, based on the other questions that are asked, are reclassified as dependent contractors. And this is particularly a huge proportion in Uganda, because there we observed a lot of people that are daily laborers or that are paid by the piece and not a wage or salary. In the second bar, we see people that self-declare themselves in own business activity. There we also see 2% of these people that are reclassified as dependent contractors. And in the bottom bar, we see self-declared contributing family workers. And now we see something also interesting, that only 40% of these people remain classified as contributing family workers. And over 50% are reclassified as independent workers. Why? Because they do take decisions on the business, on the family business. And even 8.6% are reclassified as employees because they actually get a wage or salary, although they do not perceive themselves as employees. And this is very frequent with women. We have observed in many countries that this happens, especially for women. Now, the sign of these differences is always the same in many countries. The sizes of the differences can be different from country to country, depending on the economic context and on the labor market there. Just one, yeah, exactly, just a slide to conclude and to give some more comments. Obviously, to collect the X18, the response burden will slightly increase. However, most of these questions would already be included in a typical LFS, and filters can be used in the questionnaire to reduce response burden. But in addition, if we have some more complexity, however, using these more objective criteria for identifying the ICSE will provide better precision in the measurement and in the data and in the indicator produced. Many countries have already started to introduce the X18, and many others are doing, because this is a precondition to implement also the 21st ICLS on informal economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonio. Now, Nicoletta Panuzzi is the head of the Integrated System of Labor, Education and Training Division at the Italian National Institute of Statistics. She's a methodologist, and in the past, she worked on several social statistics surveys, including the EU LFS and the EU SILC. Nicoletta, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So I would like to share with you our experience in Italy on implementing and measuring X18. And so the way we are doing it and the step we are and the challenges that we are facing right now. So the first thing we've done is set up a task force. Why? So because implementing the new X18 classification for labor statistics means identifying the methodological, theoretical, and operational criteria in order to apply in the Italian context the international classification that Antonio just showed us. Conduct a conceptual mapping through the identification and classification of all forms of employment within the Italian legal, administrative, and fiscal context allows for the coding of the basic element into the main dimension of this classification that, as already said, is authority and economic risk. And so, ensuring this way the consistency of the theoretical framework in the ISTAT, Italian National Statistical Institute production. So the context is complex, and in particular is of transversal nature, because the topic necessitates a multidisciplinary group with skills and resources from various sectors of statistical production. So not only labor force survey, but also labor register, business statistics, national account, administrative register, and data collection methodological unit. I will concentrate my presentation on labor force survey and labor register. When I talk about labor register, it's not simply administrative data, but is the statistical organization of the information coming from administrative data. So the administrative data are treated in order to answer also statistical purposes and the production we have to produce also considering Eurostat and European needs, of course. So the first step we've done is the study of each labor form that in Italy are available in legal terms. So we put all their characteristics in a synthetic skid in order to have all the characteristics that that particular form of employment own, and so try to mapping it into the classification and taking into account a systemic view. Why a systemic view? Because the data that are produced by the labor force survey and the data that are produced by the labor register, they are used by several divisions in order to produce several statistics. In particular, let's say business statistics, national account, other register cases, and also other survey on households and individuals. So you see that all the relationship and the integration is made in order to produce our statistics on employment. So the mapping and the implementation of this classification should adopt a systematic view, in particular because the main issue is that if a worker is classified as a worker for profit in the statistical business register, but in the other side, let's say, of the coin, must have an economic unit. It could be, of course, household market or enterprise, anyway, another economic unit corresponding to them. And conversely, if the business register has an household market enterprise with working owners, these owners should be classified as workers for profit. So it should be a consistency between this kind of information, and the proposal are still currently being under discussion, and I can assure that the task force is very lively in this sense. So try to obtain a consistency between the labor register and labor force service, taking the advantage of both of them. Of course, labor force service has the advantages of timeliness. Several information can be obtained by survey on price setting and on the other characteristic that Antonio already presented us. So it's easier by labor force survey the identification of the dependent contractor in particular that are the real new form of employment we consider in this classification, and of course is include unregistered employment. On the other side, the advantage of the labor register is a senseless coverage of all registered jobs, and is of course, high precision in the measurement of most of the form of working, but not so precise in the measuring the dependent contractor form. So the operationalization of the two sources is very different. Moreover, the conceptual consistency does not necessarily equate to measurement consistency, of course, because we have measurement error on both sides, even if the sources are different, of course. So again, the labor force survey must also consider the constraints set by the task force, Eurostat task force on that. And so the principle, as already known, I suppose, to all of us. And in the Italian context, we tested the understandability of question and response modality in order to understand if what we ask is well understood by the respondent in order to obtain the right answers. Use of legal form of economic unit, taking it also from the administrative information in order to understand if it is a reliable answer on that case, and also try to experiment several or integrated approaches on doing it. So I don't say anything on dependent contractor because Antonio already spoke on that, but you understand from Antonio's presentation that remuneration and social contribution payment are focal point in order to distinguish different forms. So according to the ILO definition, if the remuneration is considered for pays as opposed to for profit, or if the employer contributes to social insurance, social security scheme, the aggregate X18 category is classified as employees. But surveying by LFS, these two pieces of information is challenging, of course, especially when you have, as in Italy, we have a legal contract that refers to a hybrid relationship that is something between self-employment and employment, and is something different from the definition that ILO consider in terms of dependent contractors. So there are subjective aspects regarding different work modality that can be hidden, let's say, under the same legal contract. So in this way, comparing and integrating survey and administrative data can provide really valuable insights. I don't have time to do it, so I want to do something on the question to pose to the respondent in the LFSS contest. Number of clients, let's say, asking how many clients do you have in order to understand the dependence in terms of economic, in this case, dependence. And so sometimes they are difficult to understand. For riders, for example, the term client is something different. In this case, it should be employer. So in order to have the same, the right answer. So also something referring to the percentage of earnings derived from the main client in order to understand if there is one client that actually determines real risk of economic dependence. Or something refer how easy is the replace of the client intermediary that in the Italian context doesn't work, really, doesn't work as, let's say, reliable indicators, or some question referring to the price of your product or referring to the ownership of the tools in order to have all the information and obtaining by the labor force that from other sources, of course, they are not available. Doing different definition means having different estimate. So depending on the characteristics that we take into account and depending on the reliability of the answer we receive, of course, the estimation is pretty different. Another problem that we are facing is corporation versus household market enterprises. So that means legal form of enterprises. And again, we have problem in terms of not registered enterprise that actually suggested for Italy to include a category not registered yet. So that means the respondent is not able to know yet because it's not registered to answer referring to legal form, or the fact that in Italy can be a situation that the same person, a self-employed, hold multiple simultaneous positions performing the same work with both a corporate context and the household market enterprises. In that case, it could be useful to establish a hierarchy between the two situations in order to establish which one is, let's say, the one to take into consideration. Just one word more. So further research is necessary in order to implement this classification in different country situation. And this effort could enhance a systemic, consistent in employment statistics, taking into account national specificity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicoletta. Now, Leanne Koster. Leanne Koster worked at the Statistical Netherlands with the unit that deals with labor force statistics, and he has been there for the last 18 years. His main research topic during these years as labor statisticians have been flex work and self-employment. Leanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We just had examples from Italy, and I'm going to tell you something about the experiences at Statistics Netherlands we have with measuring XC18. There is an Eurostat task force currently looking at how to implement XC18 in the EU LFS. And several countries are doing tests to provide this task force with input and on how to proceed with XC18, and the Netherlands is one of those countries. So the tests I'm going to talk about are all done with the help of Eurostat grants. We participated in 2 test rounds, and one of them is actually still ongoing, but I can give some preliminary results there. Let me see. Oh. Yeah, so just an overview of what I will talk about in the next 12 minutes, but I will go straight there because I think I only have 11 left. I wanted to start with giving you an idea of what the Dutch labor market looks like. So in the EU LFS, we currently measure employment relationships with the variable STAPRO, which is based on the old ICSI 92. And I took some figures from the Eurostat database to compare the employment relations in the Netherlands to the average in the EU. What you can see that in the Netherlands, we have a quite flexible labor market, more than average in the rest of the EU. So that's mostly the share of non-standard contracts, and specifically temporary employees and solo self-employed are high. So both of them are high, which is pretty specific for the Netherlands. Not, I think in most countries, it's either one of them. And not both. So in the Netherlands, policymakers very much want to know what kinds of temporary contracts are used, because we have a big variety, and also whether it's real self-employed or it's dependent contractors that are causing this big rise of solo self-employment. And the new ICSA can give a lot of insight here. So I marked here in red what information we still need. So compared to what we already have in the EU LFS to measure XC18, and that is to determine first, so whether all of these employers and own account workers, whether they are incorporated or whether they are part of a household market enterprise. And then from those own account workers and household market enterprise, we also have to know whether they are actually dependent. So those are the dependent contractors. We think we will not have a lot of problems with measuring the employee, the different contracts. We would need an extra question on knowing the paid apprentices, and contributing family workers are also already part of the questionnaire. So the focus of the first test round, we focused on the distinction specifically between the corporation versus household market enterprise, and on the dependent contractors. That was what we mainly focused on. So the design of our first test round, we started with a focus group with various labor market experts in the Netherlands. We did that last year, February. And our aim was to gather information on all the ICSA groups, relevant criteria to measure, also a bit of common language that is used in the Netherlands, and for the next part, for the interviews, what kind of professions that we should look at for the cognitive interviews. That was the second part of the test. So we did 17 interviews with test respondents. We recruited them mostly via our own network. And the aim here was to evaluate how the ICSE 18 groups can be measured in the questionnaire. So some main findings of our first test round. So from the focus group, the ideas of our experts was that the criteria for the corporation versus household market enterprise, the idea was that we could best do that with asking about the legal form of the company. And they also gave us some ideas for criteria for the dependent contractors, additional to what Antonia also talked about already. So the number of clients, autonomy, embeddedness in the organization, if you use tools, if you do acquisition, and if you determine your own prices. And what we talked a lot about in the focus group was that actually legally dependent contractors do not exist in the Netherlands, and I think in more countries. So you can either be an employee or you're self-employed. Something in between is legally not possible, but of course statistically it's there, so we have to measure it. But there is, we think, however, a high risk of that you get dishonest or socially desirable answers. So that was also something that we were focusing on in the next part of the test, so the cognitive interviews. What we found there, so we tested a few questions to find out whether people were incorporated or part of a household market enterprise. But the question regarding the legal form worked best. People knew how to answer that. So we think that we can measure that. What we also found that distinguishing between own account workers in a household market enterprise and dependent contractors was problematic. That was because of issues with choosing the right client perspective, especially when an intermediary was involved. And as a result, respondents had trouble with answering the questions regarding dependency on the client for the work organization and the pricing and everything. An example to illustrate what I mean here. So we had a reintegration consultant that we interviewed, a male, 52, and the respondent, he worked as a self-employed in a household market enterprise, and he helped companies reintegrating their employees in a new job. He offered his service to a reintegration office, and that reintegration office was actually his main client. It was the intermediary sending him everywhere. But when we asked him about the number of clients, he actually thought of the employees he was helping. So he would say he had like 20 to 30 clients. And then the questions on work organization and pricing confused him completely. He didn't know whether to, how to relate them, to who to relate them. So for the ICSE classification, that was a bit diffuse, I mean, sorry. Based on his answers, he was actually, he became ICSE 22, but during the interview, he was actually a 30, but the questions just went wrong here. So they need improving. We discussed the findings within the task force, and there were more countries that had similar results, similar issues. And because we wanted to improve this part, like as I said, it's an important subject in the Netherlands. We also participated in the new grant in the next test round. And there we focused specifically on the distinction between ICSE 22 and ICSE 30 to improve those questions specifically for the intermediaries. So in this design, we again did cognitive interviews. Like I said, it's still ongoing, but we are trying to improve the questions for the ICSE 22 and 30, and we're taking the ILO model questionnaire approach here. So to give you an idea of the question, so in the first round of tests, we asked how many customers or clients do you have, and if you have more, was there one that was your main client, so where the main part of the income was coming from. When we noticed that it wasn't going very well with the intermediaries, we added a few questions. And then independent of the main client, we asked about the dependency. So can you decide on the prices, or who is deciding on the prices? We tested some different things and also different items that we got from the focus group. But then in the second test round, so we used the ILO approach, and what we did, we changed it a bit. So we first ask about whether you have an intermediary, and if there's more intermediaries, we look at if there's a main one. If there's not a main one, we also ask if you're not getting your clients through intermediaries, but you get them directly, and see if there's a main one there. So in that way, we can determine a main client. And then relating to those questions, we ask about whether you are dependent on that main client for pricing and work organization. So that's the second test round. So some first preliminary findings. Those new questions seem to work pretty well. I think we tackled the issue now with the intermediaries, like the example that I just discussed. There it would go okay now. We also tested it for some platform workers, and the examples in our question, we found that they did okay in the questions, but the examples that we now use could be a bit framing. So because we use examples of platforms, it could be that when you're in an unfamiliar platform, you don't recognize yourself. So we're a bit hesitant if we should use examples. What we also found, and that's mostly for how we're going to use this in the Eurostat variable, that setting prices, for example, is always something you negotiate. We've not heard anyone say that they're fully capable of determining their hourly rate or their prices. It's always something you negotiate. So determining whether someone is a dependent contractor, you need to know whether the main client is setting the price. And we think the best way to do that is determining this by using this direct question, and not by asking who is determining the price, because then it's very diffuse for people. They have problems with answering that. I still think that distinguishing between ICSA30 and 22 is not easy. There will remain socially desirable answers, I think. But to conclude, I'm pretty optimistic about our last test round. I think we're getting there. At least I think we're getting close to measuring HC18. Yeah. What's up? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Liane, and right on time as well. So appreciate that. Now, Veronica Huaracan Riveros is an economist. He currently serves as the head of Subdepartment of Continuous Labor Statistics at Chile National Statistics Institute. In this capacity, she provides technical oversight of the statistics productions of labor market indicators derived from the National Employment Survey. Veronica, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to present the implementation of the International Classification of Status and Employment in the National Employment Survey in Chile. First, some characteristic and milestone of the survey. Then we're going to review the impact of the 20 ICLS and the estimate of dependent contractor and some characteristics of them. And then the impact of the 21st ICLS, and finally, next steps. Well, the objective and milestone of the ENE, the National Employment Survey, or Encuesta Nacional de Empleo. ENE is the Spanish acronym. So you need to know, because I use a lot the ENE during the presentation. The ENE is a household survey whose objective is to characterize and quantify the population aged 15 and over according to their relationship with the labor market. The survey sample designs uses the unemployment rate as a target variable. And some milestones: in 2010, the ENE incorporated the recommendation of the 19 ICLS. In 2017, an analysis of labor informality has been included. And before 2020, the NA began to strengthening process in several areas, and it incorporated the guidelines set up in the 20 and the 21st ICLS. The impact of the 20 ICLS. What does the implementation of X18 means for the National Employment Survey? First, the incorporation of a new category called dependent contractor. Second, the revision of the current NA and the incorporation of the new question. And third, the measurement, the processing, and analysis of the dependent contractor. And finally, the creation of an expert group to study the proposal for the adoption of the IC18 and the identification of dependent contractors. The members include our well-known national academics, our representative of the Ministry of Labor and ILO. Well, the implementation of the IC18 in the NA. The starting point for determining the IC18 is the current question used to measure the IC93. The question is based on the self-reported status of the employed people. The result of these two questions has been used to identify the following groups. First, the independent workers, employers or on-account workers, dependent workers, employees or wage earners, or domestic workers, and finally, unpaid family workers. The implementation, besides these questions, we work in the implementation of the inclusion of other 4 questions related to decision-making or organizational dependence related to working hours, place, route, or location, whether the activity is carried out, the type of production, the product or service for sale, the price of the product or service offered. And the inclusion of 4 questions on ownership of the means of production and economy dependence related to a store, installation, or land using work, machines, tools, and transport vehicle using work. Also, the incorporation of 6 questions related to the form of payment or source of income profits, and a question of the issuance of a fee slip. This question makes it's possible to identify whether the workers has a commercial agreement or commercial contract for the provision of service instead of a labor contract. Well, the dependent contractor into the self-declared employees. These are the conditions. I'm not going to stop there because Antonio already mentioned, and is the same or the same classification of conditions for dependent contractors into the self-declared self-employed person. Well, the estimate of dependent contractors. This is a very important note because this information is preliminary. It has not yet been published, and all the information in this presentation comes from the annual estimate. Dependent contractors among on-account workers and the employees. In the case to the dependent contractors among employees, throughout the period, the dependent contractors are mainly workers who provide fee slips. And in the case of the dependent contractors among on-account workers, throughout the period, dependent contractors with the organizational dependence are more predominant than those dependent on economic variables. Well, this is the current scenario. Yeah, the total number of distribution of employed persons in 2023 according to IC 93. The most of the employed persons are private sector employees, on-account workers, and public sector employees. But after the adoption of the IC18, a change in structure and the restructuring of the level of employed person will be observed after the creation of the new category of dependent contractors. We already know that dependent contractors consist mainly of on-account workers and employees, but the number of employees and on-account workers will therefore be decreasing as a proportion of the total number of employed persons. As you can see, the difference between the two charts, the dark blue and light blue, it's the total of employed person who now is a dependent contractor, is over 10% of the employed person. Well, the characterization of dependent contractors, we already know who dependent contractors are, right? But it is important to characterize them in the dependent contractors in the Chilean labor market. The most of them are Chileans, but there are a significant number of immigrants working as a dependent contractor. That is something important because in the recent years, a lot of immigrants arrived Chile, and most of them comes from Venezuela and Haiti, and they are working as a dependent contractor. Other characteristic, most of them are men, and they are young people between 25 and 14 years old. 49 years old. According to the ICSIC, most of them work in transport, commerce, and construction, and they work in the client's or employer's premises or office, in the employer's or client's home, and on the street or public highway. According to the ISCO 08, Chilean dependent contractors work in elementary occupations, service and sales workers, and as a professionals. And a significant number work with digital platforms. And most of the dependent contractors are informal workers, 85.6%. Well, the impact of the 21st ICLS. What does it involve? To determine the formality of dependent contractors, we examine whether the dependent contractors have a register with the tax administration and whether the registration ensures access to the contributory system for Social Security. We have an important example because with the fee slip workers. In Chile, the registration as a service provider, as a fee slip, means that the workers is registered to pay taxes, and at the same time, in parallel, it's provided with the access to the Social Security through the contribution system. So, in this case, fee slip workers go from formality with the current criteria to formality with the new criteria. And the important thing is the informal employment rate decrease. There is the actual scenario, the current scenario with dependent contractors distribution by informality. As I told you, it's almost 85.6% of the total dependent contractor are informal. This number is high because the total dependent contractors who comes from dependent workers, the total number of them are informal. So, of course, the impact to the total dependent contractors. But with the new criteria, with the implementation of the 21st ICLS, dependent contractors will change the conceptual framework and the final classification about informality. As you can see in the second chart, how the figures change with the numbers. The dependent contractors who come from dependent workers, that is not all of them are informal, that now are formal and informal, and of course this result impact to the total number of dependent contractors. Next steps. Well, the definitive adoption of the ICSI in the 18 in the ENE, continue with the measure of formality and informality in dependent contractors according with the recommendation from the 21st ICLS, and then dissemination of result and methodological decisions, during 2024. And that is an important decision. The implementation of the ICSI 18 will not disrupt the current series of ICSI 93. We keep the two series in parallel. And we continue to work with the group of experts to prepare the presentation of the result at the National Technical Committee on Labor Statistics during this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Now, last but not least, Clapton Aguera, sorry about that, is a labor economist with many years of experience working in the field of labor statistics research as well as in administration. He has served the Zimbabwe public sector, including the Ministry of Labor. He is currently labor statistics manager at the Zimbabwe National Statistics Agency. Clampton, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you all. I'm going to take you through the Zimbabwean experience in the implementation of ICSE 18. So I'm going to go through the labor force survey for Zimbabwe, the status in employment, the impact of ICSE 18, and the applicability of ICSE 18 to our context. So we conduct labor force survey on a quarterly basis in Zimbabwe, in line with the 20th, in line with the 19th and the 20th ICLS. We produce such indicators to do with employment levels, employment status of the labor force, the employment in the informal economy, income levels, labor migration, and labor underutilization, among other indicators. Suffice to say that we adopted the 19th ICS recommendations in the year 2019, and also we adopted the 20th ICLS in the second quarter of 2022, and since then we've been producing statistics in accordance with ICSE 18. So I will not dwell much on the status in employment. It has been already explained by Antonio, but I just want to emphasize that as we do our analysis of the labor statistics, we don't isolate ICSE 18, but rather we analyze the indicator in relation to other indicators, which are informality and labor underutilization, for us to have a comprehensive picture. So I will not also speak to the hierarchy that has already been established, but suffice to say that we have adopted the ICSE 18A is according to type of authority, and also the ICSE 18R in accordance with the type of risk that employed persons face in their day-to-day economic activities. So the reason why we adopted ICSE as Zimbabwe is because of the comprehensiveness it gives, as opposed to the ICSE 93, where we have got unpacking of the composition of the employed persons, not just relying on the broad categories of self-employed and employed for pay, but rather it goes further. Then we also talk of the separation of risks and authority. Then again, we talk of the measurement of the quantum of the group in precarious conditions in both criterion, in line with the what we have as the Decent Work Country Program and the SDG 8. So in implementing ICSE as Zimbabwe, we faced the two major challenges. The first challenge was the integration of the ICSE 18 into our labor force survey. Here we want to thank the ILO, which assisted us, especially our regional expert, Madam Maria Payet, in integrating the ICSE 18. But the other challenge that we faced was making the policymakers understand what we meant by the new measurement, the 10 broad classes that we have under ICSE 18. Explaining to them was not a challenge, but making them understand was actually a big challenge. So what we did is we took advantage of stakeholder workshops. We took advantage of interministerial committee on labor statistics, and we also had dissemination webinars and radio interviews to ensure that all our stakeholders are aware of the new measurement of ICSE 18 so that they would incorporate them in the policy formulation. So it has had considerable impact, the ICSE 18, and to mention but a few, we have contributed to the formalization strategy using the results from the ICSE, from the labor force survey, the micro, small and medium enterprises policy 2020-2024, national financial inclusion strategy, the social security coverage of the informal sector, revision of the youth policy 2020-2025, and the Labor Act, which also was revised, taking information from the labor force survey. So in terms of applicability, we saw that regarding the economic risk, Zimbabwe is highly informalized, with 83% of all employed persons are in informal employment, and also the identification of workers at risk and in precarious employment. These are the 3D jobs, the dirty, demeaning, and dangerous jobs. We saw that we could now measure such people who are in vulnerable conditions with ease and interpret the results in a way that the stakeholders could understand. Then we also talk about the authority criterion, which helped us to identify persons who are employed for pay, who are usually on the receiving end of the work relations, and also to ensure that there was fair treatment across the different employment types, as the provisions of the new Labor Act allowed. So these are some of the documents which we contributed to immensely, using results that we were using and which were informed by the ICSE 18. We've got the National Youth Policy, we've got the Decent Work Country Program for Zimbabwe, and over the National Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises Policy. These are the documents which we contributed to using the information that we got from the Labor Force Survey and informed by the measurement strategies. Allow me to take you through some of the statistics that we have, that we disseminate on a quarterly basis from the ICSE 18 module. So here we talk about the status in employment category by sex. This one was as at first quarter of 2024, and we see that 40.4% of all our employed persons were permanent employees, and dependent contractors contributed 11.7% of our employed persons. Then looking at the contributing family workers by age group and sex, we saw that the majority of contributing workers were in the rural areas, which was 71.0%. Then looking at on-account workers in household market enterprises without employees by age group, we saw that the majority was in the 36 to 45 year age group. Then we also looked at the distribution of dependent contractors by sector and sex, and this again is in the first quarter of 2024, and we realized that for males the majority was in the informal sector, non-agriculture, but for females the majority was in the agriculture sector. Then next we talk about permanent employees by industry, where we realize that the majority of our permanent employees were actually in the agriculture, forestry, and fishing industry, which was at 19.2%. But for females, the majority of our permanent employees were actually in the education industry, which was at 25.5%. So these are some of the indicators that we share with our stakeholders to ensure that they understand what are the dynamics in the Zimbabwean labor market, and we explain to them what it means in terms of policy and also in terms of the dynamics that are obtaining in at a given point, in this case, in a given quarter. And these results were as at the first quarter of 2024. I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. Now, how much time do we have left for question and answers? Well, we do have questions from the floor. So before we do, quickly, before the mic to make it, have the questions in the front, I just want all of us to thank our panelists for their excellent presentations. We had in front of us the general presentations of ICSE, the development of it, as well as key national implementations, whether in terms of testing, some questions and some results, as well as impact on policymakers. So I guess we have a lot of things that we can talk about. So the floor is now yours. First question, and please thank them, and let's go ahead with that question after that.
Thank you. I'm Ann Polifka from the BLS. I have a question with regards to your experience or suggestions about measuring dependent contractors with regards to newly self-employed, newly formed businesses, the number of clients they might have, how much their income might be coming from that might be low, and how that might reflect over a business cycle where you're having expansions with more new companies. So just what you might say about that, and also how you treat intermittent employees in terms of number of customers and proportion of income. That's for like the Netherlands and Italy and Uganda. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Let me, so you want to know how we treat newly formed self-employed. So I think we need an extra category there. I think we already have it in our main client variable at the moment in the EU LFS. So if you still have no clients, you cannot. That's not a case of necessarily a case of dependent contracting. So you won't necessarily put them there or lead them to questions regarding dependency. I think I'm going to look at Ricardo here. We haven't decided about that yet, but I think that's an issue. And you're sorry. So if you have one client. Then that's automatically we ask you the questions regarding dependency. So if you have one client and you're also dependent on that client, then you would be a dependent contractor. That's the idea. So you also have to ask positively on those questions. And you had another question about it.
It was with regard to intermittent employment, and if you were dependent on one client at one time, but you had a lot of different dependencies across the year, would you count that as dependent?
We now ask in the last 12 months. So yeah, it would depend on how they would answer. But if they would answer positively to that, then if they had one main client in the last 12 months, then and they were dependent on it, then they would be considered a dependent contractor. Oh, yeah.
Another
Also-
question in the back right here. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yep.
I saw that.
Can I?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Can you hear me? Okay. So also in Italy, in fact, we tested asking for the percentage of earnings derived from the main client in the last 12 months. So in this case, also, if you have several answers, for example, less than 50% or between 50 and 74 or more than 75, maybe, then we can also see which is the distribution. Also, you can together decide which kind of threshold you can use in order to define the main client. I would like to say also consider that administrative data can also help you in that. If we have at this time electronic invoicing, for example, can help you on also test this kind of answer in order to define client and main client too.
Thank you. Anyone else before I've been told that someone else wanted to answer? Thank you. It was a question in the back first.
Yes. Good afternoon. Emiliano Rustichelli, the chair of the Employment Committee. I was quite interested in this presentation, and so I would like to thank all the speakers. But I mean, I have really quite concerns about how can we, I mean, distinguish between genuine, let's say, dependent contractors and informal workers. This was the case indeed for many examples we have seen, we have presented with. It is very difficult to understand to what extent we are talking about dependent contractors or just people working as employee without a formal contract. And depending on the legal framework, this could be a very difficult aspect to catch, to grab, and also, of course, for a policymaker then to react. Because on the one side, you have informal workers or undeclared workers, and this is, let's say, an issue that could be addressed with some policy levers. On the other hand, you have dependent contractors, and in that case, it is about social protection, how to extend social protection to those people. So it is very relevant to be able to catch the differences between these two, let's say, set of workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe Antonio, start?
Yeah, okay. I think this answer can be better asked in the next section, but I would like to give you an answer here. These are two concepts that overlaps, but are distinguished. Now, for employees, it's normal that if an employee has a formal job, it's an employee, cannot be considered a dependent contractor. Now, for employers, again, the distinction is made by the criteria of incorporation. So let's say if an employer has an enterprise, a independent worker has an enterprise that is registered, that enterprise is formal. Okay? If it's not, but if it's not incorporated, it could be, that person could be a dependent contractor. Okay, so here the distinction is between registration and incorporation. So if registered, the independent worker are formal. If not incorporated, could become dependent contractors. So it's a perhaps next section we will discuss more informality and we'll provide more in-depth answer to this. Is that correct?
Where's Michael?
Yep.
Yeah, Michael.
Perhaps Michael can.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the question. I think it's a very relevant question, and I think, as Antonio said, what we are dealing with is two different but related issues. So one aspect is informality and formality, and the other aspect is the type of work relationship the person has. So the category of status in employment in itself carries information. It carries information whether the person is a dependent contractor or an employee. And then in addition to that, whether this work relationship is informal or formal carries additional information. And those two things need to be combined. And as also been mentioned here a couple of times, the 21st ICLS resolution concerning statistics on the informal economy is built on ICSE 18, so it takes that into account. So yeah, just a little input.
Thank you, Michael. You had a third question? Please go ahead.
Yes. Hello, good afternoon. Pablo Dragún from Unión Industrial Argentina and from the International Employers Organization. Just one question. It's very interesting to see how you are applying into your national statistics institutes and the new categories made by the ILSCS. And especially what strikes my mind, it was about the example of Chile, which obviously has been a neighbor country of Argentina, has some similarities in a way that, for example, how the increasing of the dependent contractors, but also strikes my attention that those dependent contractors working in the public sector was in percentage, if my account was okay, was double in percentage than the private sector, which if the same case would have been carried in Argentina, I know it's previous data, so I won't share and all those issues, but to see how into the public policy how to apply this, because currently in Latin America our rate of informality is really high, and in other countries it still, as in Europe, it hasn't been measured. That's one of the ways of this conference. But what happened is that we were measuring things that it didn't explain much. So in particular in the public sector, how do you think that especially the policy, the politics will apply to this, since it involves a different level of involvement, and it involves some the fiscal constraint and all the things that it's normal when you're as a public servant, what it carries in your mind. So that's my opinion. It's very interesting, all the panelists. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm going to relate your question with the previous one, because the dependent contractors who come from on-account workers, the definition of informal is based on the informal sector. Yeah, that is whether the worker is registered or not. In the case of dependent contractors who comes from dependent workers, can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah. Who comes from dependent workers, the definition is based on the access to the social security according with the relationship with the employer. Now in the Chilean case, with the new law, national law, and with the new criteria for the 21st ICLS, changed the situation, changed everything. And now, for example, that the figure I showed before, in the case of dependent contractors who comes from dependent workers, the most of them are public sector employees, and with the current definition of of informal, they are informal people. And now with the change of the law, with the change of the new criteria, they transform independent contractors formal. That is a big change for us. It's part of something that we are still studying, because the informal employment rate will decrease in the future. So it's something that is difficult to communicate. It's difficult to process for someone that is not involved in this topic. But of course, we are trying to do it well. But in the case of public sector employees, in this case, it's two effects here: the effects of the law, the national law, and the 21st IECLS that reduced the number of informal dependent contractors in the public sector employees.
Thank you. No more reactions? Ricardo?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Riccardo Gatto, and I work in the LFS methodological team in Eurostat. First of all, I would like to thank all the speakers, because all presentations were amazingly interesting, and really it's a pity that the time constraints does not allow to ask questions to everyone. So I go to Antonio. As I have noticed this really interesting connection between ICSE and formal informality in all your presentation, and this is already one point relevant that came from all your presentation. But I would like to do a further step, thinking about also to other forms of work. You have presented the third hierarchy, the most detailed ICSE that have been decided in the resolution, in the 18 resolution, the ICSE AW18, that covers also forms of work different from employment. Now, we are very far from implementing this in the LFS, but I would like to ask your opinion about, do you think in the future, looking forward, this would be an important step to do in order to further enhance our knowledge on the labor market? Because I see a lot of connection also in a certain kind of work that are not actual employment, but they affect a lot the labor market also. I think having information on this from the same source, coherent, the labor force survey, would be perfect. I don't know how to do it, because that's really hard, but what do you think about it?
Thanks, Ricardo. This is an interesting question, but you already gave the answer. You said it would be perfect to have the information from the same source, and I agree. It would be perfect. And if I can recall a pilot study we did in Sri Lanka, we actually covered with the labor force survey the employment, and we covered also the own-use production of goods and the own-use provision of services. Therefore, we covered 3 forms of work there. We could have covered also voluntary work. And what we got, the result we got from this pilot study was that we have a huge amount of additional information to describe the way people and households organize their life around all type of work. How people in the family decide how to share responsibilities and let's say working type. We saw, for example, that we have, of course, many women and men working in employment, but we have generally in that place we had many men working in agriculture more than women, working more hours in agriculture. So when we take the employment, we look, men works more than women in terms of hours. When we add agriculture, men still work more than women in terms of hours. When we add honest provision of services to work in the household, the care of children, cooking, cleaning, and all the other things, women work far more than men. So this is extremely, extremely important. And women are in those activities that are mostly unpaid, not only care work, but also on contributing family work. So, and there, they are still unpaid. So it's really crucial to have, for example, information for the same reference period on these three different types of work. Of course, it's challenging because the questionnaire becomes too long. But also my colleague Kieran said, why do not think at modular approach? And you are expert in Eurostat of modular approach. So in certain years, in certain moments, you ask a very comprehensive questionnaire, and in other moments, you ask only the core questions. Perhaps that is the way to go. I hope I gave some answer.
Good. Thank you. I'm sure we'll continue to talk a lot about the implementations of ICSE, as well as the concept of dependent contractors the next day or so. And I wish that we had time to hear all of you about advices you might want to share about the actual implementations of these standards on a day-to-day basis and what to avoid and make it better. But unfortunately, we don't have time. So I want to thank you for all those questions, and we'll continue this after the next sessions. I believe someone else was supposed, oh, there you are. So I leave the floor to you. So thank you a lot for your participation. Looking forward to continue the conversations later. Thanks.
Yes, I'm back with some housekeeping information. So first, the day has already advanced a little bit. I would just remind that upstairs there are some booths where you can charge your phones. So if you get afterwards, you want your phones charged, it's upstairs. Also, I said it earlier on, but it was a bit, I was not here on stage. So there is a photo booth. You can take photos of yourself with our nice background here. So please feel free. There's also another place where you can take photos in front of such a thing. That's all good, but there is even more about photos. So after the end of the conference today and before the social program, or just in between, we want to take a group photo downstairs. So you will get more instructions after the next session, but I just thought I want you to be prepared, so make yourself ready. And even those who don't participate in the social program, afterwards, it would be nice to have you on the photo. That's all for now. There's nothing more between me and the coffee break. So